I want to tell you about something that almost no one prepares for, because it arrives at the one moment in life when a person has the least strength to deal with it. It is a financial trap, and it springs shut in the weeks and months after a husband or a wife passes away. The grieving spouse, the one left behind, is sitting at the kitchen table trying to make sense of a world that has just been torn in half, and quietly, without warning, their income falls, and at the very same time, their tax bill can actually go up. Less money coming in, a higher rate taken out. At the worst possible moment of their life. It has a name among the people who understand these things. They call it the widow's tax. And the cruelest part is that it is almost entirely avoidable if you understand it before the day arrives. I want to tell you about a woman. We'll call her Margaret, because that is not her real name. But I have sat across from more than one Margaret in my time, and the story is always heartbreakingly similar. Margaret and her husband had a good retirement. Not extravagant, but comfortable and secure. 2 Social Security checks coming in. A steady income from their savings. They had been careful people their whole lives, and it had worked. And then her husband passed away, after more than 40 years of marriage. And in the middle of her grief, while she was still learning how to sleep in a house that had gone silent, the letters started to arrive. Her income had dropped, and her taxes, somehow, were about to climb. Margaret could not understand it. She had done nothing wrong, and she had not. The system had simply done to her what it quietly does to so many surviving spouses, and no one had ever warned her it was coming. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how the widow's tax works, why losing a spouse can paradoxically raise the survivor's tax rate, the specific decisions you can make now, while both spouses are alive and well, to defuse this trap before it ever springs, and how the most caring retirees I ever knew protected the person they would one day leave behind. Because this, more than almost any other decision on this channel, is an act of love. It is something you do, quietly, years in advance, for someone you may never see face the consequences. And almost no one does it, simply because no one ever told them they could. Now, before we go any further, the same honesty I always give you. I cannot hand you a single form to sign that makes this disappear, because the right moves depend on your savings, your income, and your particular situation. What I can give you is the understanding, the shape of the trap, and the levers that disarm it. Once you can see it clearly, you can act. And acting even a few years early can change everything for the person left behind. So let's start with the 2 blows. Because the widow's tax is really 2 separate things happening at once, and they land together. The first blow is the drop in income. When one spouse passes away, the household generally loses one of its 2 Social Security checks. The survivor keeps the larger of the 2 benefits, but the smaller one stops. This is exactly the survivor math we touched on before. So right away, the income coming into the home falls. 1 check, where there used to be 2. For many couples, that is a significant loss, and it is permanent. Now, a reasonable person hears that and thinks, well, that is sad, but at least with less income, the taxes should be lower too. And that is exactly the assumption the widow's tax preys upon, because it does not work that way. And here is the second blow, the one nobody sees coming. When a married couple files their taxes together, they get the benefit of being treated as a couple. Wider tax brackets, a larger standard deduction. The tax system, in effect, gives a married couple more room before the higher rates kick in. But the year after a spouse passes, the survivor generally has to begin filing alone, as a single person, and a single person gets roughly half of that room. Narrower brackets, a smaller deduction. The same income that was comfortably taxed at a gentle rate when there were 2 of them can suddenly be pushed into a higher rate when there is only one. So look at what has happened to Margaret. Her income went down because she lost a Social Security check, but her tax rate went up because she now files as a single person with half the room she used to have. Less money, taxed harder. That is the widow's tax. It is not a special tax with its own name on a form. It is the quiet, brutal arithmetic of what happens when a two-person tax shelter suddenly has to cover one person who still has nearly the same expenses, the same home, the same life to pay for, but now must face it alone and at a higher rate. Let me make the arithmetic real, because it sounds almost unbelievable until you see it. Imagine the same income, say a comfortable retirement income, flowing into a home. When two people are alive and filing jointly, that income sits inside the wide married brackets, and a good portion of it is sheltered by the larger joint deduction. The effective tax rate is gentle. Now the husband passes. The next year, that same household income, perhaps only slightly reduced, has to squeeze into the single brackets, which are roughly half as wide, with a deduction roughly half as large. The income that used to peak just over the edge of a low bracket now spills well into a higher one. The survivor can end up paying noticeably more tax on roughly the same money, purely because the filing status changed from two people to one. Nothing about her spending got cheaper. Her property taxes did not fall. Her insurance did not fall. If anything, facing the world alone costs more, not less. And into that, the tax system reaches in and takes a larger share. That is why they call it a trap. It is engineered, almost perfectly, to strike when a person is least able to absorb it. And here is a detail that makes it even harder. This does not happen years later, gradually, giving the survivor time to adjust. It happens fast, often in the very next tax year after the loss. One year, you are a couple with all the room in the world. The next, you are alone, in the narrow brackets, with letters arriving that you do not understand. During the exact season when you have the least emotional capacity to deal with paperwork and numbers. The timing is merciless. Let me say something directly to you, because this one is heavier than the others. If you are part of a couple watching this together, I want you to look at each other for a moment, because this is about the two of you, and about which one of you will one day be the Margaret in this story. And if you are watching this alone, perhaps because you have already lived it, already felt this trap spring shut, then I am sorry. And I want you to know that understanding it now still matters, because there are moves that help even after the fact. This channel exists for exactly these conversations, the ones families do not have until it is too late. So subscribe and stay with me, because now I am going to show you how to diffuse this, and the window to do it is open right now, while you still can. Here is the heart of it. The widow's tax does its damage through that big tax-deferred retirement account, the same bucket we have talked about before. Remember, every dollar that comes out of that account is taxed as ordinary income. While both spouses are alive, filing jointly, with all that extra room in the brackets, those withdrawals can be managed at a reasonable rate. But after one spouse passes, those very same withdrawals, now taxed in the narrow single brackets, become far more painful. The survivor is forced to keep pulling money from that account to live, and each dollar is now taxed harder than it ever would have been while both were alive. The larger that account is when one spouse dies, the deeper the widow's tax cuts. And this is what hands you the solution, because it points directly at what to do. If the danger lives inside that big tax-deferred account, then the way to reduce the danger is to thoughtfully shrink that account while both spouses are still alive, during those years when you still have all the room of filing jointly. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is the very same strategy we talked about for the retirement account order, and for delaying Social Security. Use the low tax years, while you are a couple, to deliberately draw down or convert that tax-deferred money at the gentle joint rates, moving it where you can into the tax-free Roth bucket, so that there is less of it sitting there, waiting to be taxed at the harsh single rates after one of you is gone. Think about what that accomplishes for the survivor. Money that lives in the tax-free Roth bucket does not punish a single filer the way the tax-deferred bucket does. It comes out tax-free regardless of which brackets you are in. So every dollar you can move in advance from the dangerous bucket to the safe one is a dollar that the widow's tax can never touch. You are, in effect, building a shelter for your spouse, room by room, in the years before the storm, so that when the day comes that you are no longer there to help them, the money is already protected. There is a second layer to this that the careful ones understood, and it concerns those forced withdrawals we talked about before. Remember that the law eventually forces money out of the tax-deferred account whether you want it or not. For a surviving spouse, that forced withdrawal now lands in the single brackets, compounding the widow's tax year after year for the rest of their life. So shrinking that account in advance does not just help once. It reduces the size of every forced withdrawal the survivor will ever face, which means it reduces the widow's tax every single year going forward. One set of careful decisions, made while both spouses are alive, quietly pays off again and again across the survivor's entire remaining life. And I want to mention one more tool, because people often ask about it. Life insurance can play a role here, and for some families it is part of the answer because the proceeds generally arrive tax-free and can cushion the income drop. But insurance is not a substitute for the deeper work of managing that tax-deferred account, and depending on your age and health, it can be expensive. It is a piece of the puzzle for some, not a magic solution for all. The foundation, for almost everyone, remains the same quiet strategy. Shrink the dangerous bucket while you are still a couple, and move what you can into the bucket the tax system cannot reach. I want you to sit with how quietly powerful that is. Most acts of providing for a spouse are visible: a life insurance policy, a paid-off home, a note left in a drawer. But this one is invisible. It is a series of careful, unglamorous decisions made over several years that no one will ever thank you for, because by the time the benefit arrives, you will be gone, and the person it protects may never even understand that you did it. The most caring retirees I ever knew did it anyway. They sat down, often in their 60s, and they asked a hard question that most people avoid. One of us will likely outlive the other. What can we do now, together, while we are both still here and still strong, to make sure the one left behind is protected? And then they did the quiet work. That, to me, is one of the purest forms of love I have ever seen expressed in numbers. Now let me deal with a few things honestly, because no trap is exactly the same for everyone. The size of the widow's tax depends a great deal on how much income the survivor will have and how large that tax-deferred account is. For a couple with modest savings, the effect is smaller. For a couple with a substantial tax-deferred account and good income, the effect can be severe, and the case for acting early is strong. There is also the matter of timing. The strategy of drawing down that account works best when you have years to do it gradually, smoothing it out, rather than trying to fix everything in a single panicked year. Which is exactly why this is a decision to understand now, in your 50s or 60s, and not something to discover in the year after a loss, when it is largely too late to do the most powerful work. And as always, this is the kind of situation where sitting down once with a fee-only advisor, someone who charges a flat, honest fee, rather than taking a slice of your money forever, can be genuinely worth it. because the right sequence depends on your specific numbers. There is one more thing I have to say, and it is the hardest, because it is not about money at all. The reason this trap catches so many families is not ignorance of taxes. It is that we do not like to talk about this. We do not like to sit at the table with the person we love and say the words, "When one of us is gone." It feels like inviting it in. It feels like a betrayal of hope, and so the conversation never happens, and the planning never happens, and the trap springs years later on someone who is too heartbroken to fight it. I am not asking you to dwell on loss. I am asking you to have one brave, loving, practical conversation while you are both still here, so that the love you have built over a lifetime is still working, still protecting, even after one of you can no longer be in the room. That conversation is the single most valuable thing in this entire file. And let me speak for a moment to the one who tends to handle the money in a marriage, because in many couples there is one person who manages the accounts and one who does not. If that is you, I want to gently challenge you on something. It is not enough for you to understand this. The person who does not handle the money is very often the one who will be left behind, sitting in front of statements and logins and letters they have never had to face before, grieving and overwhelmed at the same time. So part of this loving work is not just shrinking the dangerous bucket. It is making sure the other person knows where everything is, understands the broad shape of the plan, and has the name of one trustworthy person they can call. I have watched survivors who were financially protected still suffer terribly, simply because the spouse who passed had kept all the knowledge in his own head. Protect your spouse with the numbers, yes, but also protect them with knowledge. Both are acts of love, and the second one costs you nothing but a few honest afternoons. I have seen families do this well, and the difference in the survivor's life is profound, not because they had more money than anyone else, but because the one who passed had taken the time, years earlier, to make the path simple for the one who remained. The accounts were arranged. The dangerous bucket had been quietly shrunk. The survivor knew who to call and what to expect. And so, in the middle of the worst grief of their life, the money, at least, did not become a second source of suffering. That is what we are really talking about here. Not tax brackets, mercy, arranged in advance. So let's bring Margaret back one last time. She lost her husband, and then she lost a Social Security check, and then she was pushed into the single brackets and taxed harder on the money she had left, all in the same terrible season of her life. None of it was her fault, and none of it was her husband's fault either. He was a careful, loving man. He simply did not know that this trap existed, and so he never did the quiet work that would have spared her. He could have. The window was open for years. No one ever told him it was there. That, and nothing else, is the difference between a Margaret who struggles and a Margaret who is protected. Not luck, not wealth, just knowing, in time. So let's bring it all together. When one spouse dies, two blows land at once. The household loses a Social Security check, so income falls, and the survivor must begin filing as a single person, with narrower brackets and a smaller deduction, so the tax rate climbs. Less money, taxed harder, at the worst moment imaginable. The trap lives inside the big tax-deferred account, where every dollar is taxed as ordinary income, now at brutal single rates. And the way to diffuse it is the same quiet strategy we keep returning to. Use the joint years, while you are both here, to draw down and convert that account deliberately, moving money into the tax-free bucket the widow's tax can never reach. It is invisible work, it is unglamorous work, and it is one of the most loving things you will ever do for another human being. It is, above all, a decision, one you make long before the day it matters, for someone who may never know you made it. And almost no one makes it in time. Before you go, tell me something in the comments, and be gentle with yourself as you answer it. Have you and the person you love ever actually sat down and talked about what happens, financially, to whichever one of you is left behind? Most couples never have. If you have, you are rarer than you know. And if you have not, perhaps today is the nudge to have that one brave conversation. And if you want the rest of these, the decisions that define your retirement, and the ones you can't undo, then subscribe and stay with me. There is a new file every week. The next one is about a different kind of trap, one that catches people who think a fully paid-off house is the safest thing they own. It is called dead equity, and it can quietly cost you for years without you ever feeling the bill. It is a decision hiding inside the walls of your own home. Take your time with these. They are the decisions of a lifetime, and a lifetime of work has earned them your patience.